My name is Ben Morgan. I'm a Business Development Manager from Fusionworkshop. Talking today around the preparatory work that organisations need to do to enable DMS to function, and specifically looking at OPP, one of our customers, and work we've done to help them get to a position with DMS. So I'm briefly going to set the scene and give you some background information on Fusionworkshop. That'll be very brief, and a little bit more on OPP, who aren't necessarily a household name. So Fusionworkshop. We're a digital business. We're a Sitecore agency. We've been operating since 2000, well-financed, well-managed. We've been a Sitecore partner for 4 years now. We no longer offer any other platform other than Sitecore. We specifically focus on that. Historically, we were an Alterian partner. We've played about with Umbraco a bit, but made a conscious decision to move away from everything else. Our Sitecore technical team now comprises of 20 people. It's a mix of front-end, back-end, UX, and PM staff. And we completed 21 Sitecore builds in the last 23 months. 22, 23, and 24 have all been commissioned as well. So we're a relatively small agency based in Cardiff, but busy and focused on just working with Sitecore. So who's OPP? OPP is not a household name, so I'm going to spend a couple of minutes telling you about them as an organisation. So whilst the brand isn't recognisable to most, the MBTI or Myers-Briggs type indicator will be known to many. That and other products that are sold by OPP are owned by an organisation called CPP, who are a publishing house based in California. And the majority of OPP's products, other than 16PF, which is internally owned and developed by OPP, are owned by CPP. So OPP are a distributor as well as a publisher and consultancy house selling psychometric instruments. So, a bit of background about them. The business has been in existence for 26 years. It's got a global customer base and offices throughout Europe and the States. They've got a growing partner network of global organizations who sell their consultancy services and products, who are either practitioners, being sole traders, or larger organizations. In some cases, they actually go on and sell product for OPP as well. They use psychometric tools and applications to develop individuals, be that conflict management or talent management, within a business scenario or a business context. Typically personality assessments, and they're considered experts within their field in the UK. So they do work with Cranfield University around their MBA courses, and they're regularly asked to speak at the British Psychological Society conferences. So they've got pretty much unrivaled expertise within the UK, certainly within the tools that they use. Sorry, this is slow going through. Logo suit or soup. You see enough of this from Sitecore and pretty much everyone else that you could possibly get a pitch from. But it shows a small cross-section of the customer base that OPP work with. It gives an understanding of the size of organizations and customers, as well as the diversity of market that they work within, and the kind of penetration they have from the product sets with significant businesses. So a number of those shown are case studies for them, and this demonstrates how they're actually adding true value to organizations they're working with. So, routes to market. Essentially, OPP provide product. They also provide product and guide people on how to use it. So there's typically 4 ways that they sell. It's a do-it-yourself model where they sell a product to a business, and that business is typically HR department will then deploy that internally, be it through delivery of questionnaires, and then analyze that data themselves. You can become a practitioner, so you can train with them to become certified to use the tools. They have a separate platform called OPP Assessment that isn't on Sitecore yet, which is an online learning tool. And then you can do it with OPP. They can provide consultancy to help, or OPP can just do it for you. It's turnkey solutions. So 4 typical routes to market. And then summer 2011 was when we really started to engage them as a business. There was a period of recognition within OPP that they needed to make some major changes. This coincided with a change at board level. They had a new CCO joining, which really changed commercial focus of the business. His desire was to make digital a platform for the organization moving forwards rather than something that had almost inhibited at times prior to, and something that was lead generating. Oh, excuse me. It might seem of little significance to you, but what we're finding with organizations that are talking about DMS is that those best placed to use DMS are those that are going through that organizational change. They're experiencing either board level change or they have somebody very innovative sitting at board that is looking to drive business change. If an organization is quite static in its desires and needs, the DMS will create challenges and potential internal conflict where you're trying to push change out. Marketing are likely to have to, unfortunately, change their way of thinking about the web. Scoring, values, metrics, and the way that you're looking at driving a sales funnel is very different to just using Sitecore on its own or historically page-based systems. So the need for change. This will lead into DMS at some point, so bear with me. Digital really wasn't delivering for them at all. I think it's probably fair to say that they didn't really have any digital at all. Their site was hard to use, dated, two-dimensional. It was brochureware and it wasn't delivering for the customer, let alone the internal stakeholders. Content was hard to find. It was almost impossible to edit. And they were using an old version of Ectron, an old version of SharePoint coupled together. It just wasn't right. So throughout their partner network and their global offices, they were looking to push out that content editing function around the business, but couldn't do that. The application was inhibiting that. So that was creating a major issue. It was meaning that multilingual product and question-based inquiries were coming into a call center in Oxford, was being dealt by a team that were multilingual, and it just wasn't a very cost-effective way of delivering. So without the ability to manage content, without the ability to test, they were limited in their analytics. They were running Google Analytics, but nothing really meaningful was coming out. And further to this, they weren't really able to establish a good set of KPIs or success factors without the site having any dynamism. The unfortunate bottom line for them was that their online shop was contributing only 3% of total revenue. And it's still the case that's where they are today. They haven't changed the platform the online shop sits on. It's in the pipeline and certainly on our roadmap. But they are going through a change on their ERP system. The ERP system is limited technologically with its web services layer. So we're waiting on that one. So business impact to OPP for this poor digital experience. The site was having a negative business impact. The user experience was poor, content was hard to find, and not all of the content was really relevant to the end user. The visual brand wasn't delivering, and the online brand wasn't really displaying the personality or capability of the team at OPP. So the site was, it wasn't creating sales leads, which was the ultimate goal for OPP. Less than that, though, it wasn't really creating any engagement at any level with customer base, prospects, or the partner organization, which for them is, in effect, a virtual sales team. The site didn't have any clear call to actions. It didn't lead a visitor down a clear sales funnel or even identify that user. So the site's visitors fitted several different personas, all of which had different needs, and the partners and practitioners at OPP, they needed tools that enable them to sell. And the fact that technologically the platform was poor and old meant that delivering these new tools to their customer base was very difficult. Further to that, content was written with one persona in mind. Typically, this was the occupational psychologist or the academic occupational psychologist, so pretty dry content that isn't necessarily consumable by anybody that doesn't fit within that persona. So their customer base within HR, their customer base within the practitioners. The content didn't necessarily meet their needs. It didn't necessarily resonate with them at any level. And this is something we see a lot with customers we work with, and also something we've been guilty of internally, writing content for a single persona. Certainly that wasn't an academic occupational psychologist, but writing for a single persona is something we've done before. Internal content authors have been writing content in the language that they speak in. They've been not necessarily writing content for the audience. It's an assumption they've made, and it's not delivered for their organization. So you can see a clear correlation between these points and DMS. So DMS is there to create a positive, tailored customer experience that enhances brand. The engagement values allow you to identify users that have gone through a journey on your site and see which users are desirable to you and those that aren't. Lead scoring pushes users down a sale funnel to a point where they transact, be that information and data or actual purchase in return for something of value to them or a product. So looking through this now, it just wasn't working for them. The business impact was large, and I'm going to digress slightly at this point and talk about content for a single persona, or indeed for the wrong persona, as most of the point of what I'm talking about today is content-based. I think I'm going to talk about Fusionworkshop in this example, and at this point it's probably easier to think of us as a Sitecore customer rather than the partner. We use Sitecore internally. We have a marketing manager. We use DMS. We've been using OMS prior to DMS. So whilst we are a partner, we're also a customer. As a business, we've got a technology background. We've got a technology history. We are and always have been a development-based organization. We didn't come from a marketing background. My MD worked on kind of business-critical, large blue-chip software products before founding the business. And we've never built a brochureware site. So we're this technology agency that has then moved gradually into communicating with marketing people. We became a Sitecore partner 4 years ago. And during that time, we've seen OMS and DMS really change the marketplace for us and for our customers. I started selling Sitecore 6 years ago for a partner called EduServe. And working at EduServe, we literally spoke to IT directors only. We had no communication with the marketing team. And there's been a sea change in that, where now I only speak to marketers. I might speak to senior operating professionals when we get into project or at the end of a bid process, but the initial engagement is always with a marketer. So DMS has changed everything. There's been this shift, and considering that we're selling Sitecore and we're immersed in this Sitecore world and building projects all the time, it took us a fair amount of time to get to a point where we identified the need to change the way we were writing content as a business. And that might seem stupid, but for us to identify that and change and start writing content for different personas was probably 18 months ago, and was seen as being relatively important. And where we're speaking to organizations and customers that we're trying to sell services into, and they're struggling with this concept of different tone of voice for different personas within a DMS environment, it's no wonder, considering we are that close to it and also find it challenging. So the content has lost its appeal, it's lost its message. The site is still in the state it was a year ago. This is our site I'm talking about now. But over the last 6 months, we've been going through a process where we've been doing something about it and doing a lot about it as it happens. So it's about content. We're still technically strong. We know what we're doing. We know how we want to engage, but we want to engage with different people. Most of the people in this audience today, if you go to our site and you read the content in it, it isn't going to relate to you, which is why we're rewriting it all. So we've got a pretty clear idea of how content is important to DMS. And to make the most of DMS, you really need to understand this content. So that's kind of the end of my digression on that point. But I'm going to come back to content shortly, when the slide changes. So business goals. These are OPP's business goals. They wanted a market-leading CMS. It needed to be a digital marketing platform rather than just CMS. And Sitecore was chosen based on a number of factors. They did their research. They'd been to Gartner. Interestingly, the CCO that joined OPP was ex-VP of sales from SDL. So he knew the market well. He knew it was out there. And he was looking to purchase something on value that would deliver for his internal development team as well as through a partner channel. But DMS was the key function that separated Sitecore. This was the reason they purchased the platform. They needed to increase online as a sales channel. They needed to engage with their customer segments more. And at that point, OPP thought they were ready to use DMS. They had an internal understanding that they were ready for the application. So they'd been working towards DMS without really knowing it. Before we engaged with OPP, they'd done a lot of the right things. They'd done a lot of the prep that's required to set a good foundation within the Sitecore platform app. They were defining their digital strategy, but they were doing this with an external creative agency that was selected before they'd selected platform. And they undertook some of the research into some of the areas, but it was a little bit misplaced, I think is probably the right term to use. They defined personas, but the personas weren't detailed enough. They'd created a content plan with those personas relating back to it, and they understood what their visitors were and how their visitors interacted, or at least believed they did. And they understood content with a kind of catch-all top-level funnel for people visiting the site, and then the long tail of more detailed and complex content that related back to the academic occupational psychologists. And they understood that things needed to be focused and targeted, but they didn't necessarily go about it in the most efficient and effective way because they weren't knowledgeable from the platform perspective. So they chose a partner based on DMS, and that was really it. So they went out to a number of Sitecore partners. They wanted to see DMS working. They wanted evidence. They weren't happy to just have a demo. A demo wasn't going to cut it. So we used our own site to demo back to them. I'm not going to dwell on this, but the basic premise was we got them to come to the site, a number of their staff, they navigated around it. They created an engagement value. We put them against the patent cards. The site personalized based on them being a potential Sitecore customer. And they completed a call to action, which created an engagement plan, and then a number of emails went off to them. The last one being WebEx to show them all the DMS data that we'd collected on them, how it worked, and how we'd moved them through a sales funnel. So that was how they chose a partner, but still they still thought that they were quite almost ready to use it. As it stood on the customer experience maturity model, they were well at the left-hand side. They were in kind of that horrible mustard color. So building sites to be DMS ready. We've got something that we call content first internally, which is our approach to all the Sitecore projects we undertake. It's kind of the utopian level that we would like to engage at, and we never get that exact level of engagement. But we need to go through this to be able to understand what they want from their business, to be able to assign those business goals, business values, and then we can be in a position where we can deliver DMS at a later stage. So I'm not necessarily looking to evangelize about this as such, but it's an approach that's helping us deal with something that's challenging for business, challenging for us as a Sitecore customer as well as a Sitecore partner. And it's something that we're using to walk our customers through their challenges. So what is content first? This is our internal definition. So an inclusive process that guides the creation of data structure and editor build in any Sitecore project. So the inclusive bit is, in this context, referring to the owner of the content, so the senior content strategist within the customer base. They need to understand the structure of the site, not just from a content perspective, but an IA perspective. And if you consider what we're actually building out as part of this. We're building the content editor's UI, so they need to be aware of that, and it's something where you're building new Sitecore sites, you need to understand that the way the data is structured is going to influence the way that you're going to edit it on the page. So why content first? So it should reduce a number of factors. Content is obviously important to web projects. That's why we're in a CMS environment and here talking about CMS today. Mistakes with content are easy to rectify. If it's not right, we're not building rocket systems or anything that's life critical. You can lift up a website. You can restructure some of the architecture underneath if needs be. But getting the content right first will cut down on change. It'll cut down on change control and hopefully avoid scope creep as you move forward. The content strategy, if known and understood early on, is really going to help you when you move forward to rolling out DMS. So key principles of this for us. I'm not going to go through them now. I'll deal with them individually. So why should content come first? Content needs to be focused from a business perspective and a Sitecore perspective. Data and information are arguably the most important thing to you. Everyone here is in an information business. If you weren't, you wouldn't have bought Sitecore. From Sitecore's perspective, the data and information structure is really the starting point. So you have to have your templates defined. Your templates will drive that content. And what is content? So a couple of definitions that I cherry-picked as I was stealing them from the web. The first bullet point really indicates something that's contained, so be it contained in a box, a website, or in this case, a content object within Sitecore. It's something that is held. The second bullet point is more around the expression of a piece of content, the conversation it has with an individual. And the last bullet point is the context viewed in contrast to the presentation. So what's in the box is important. So that's what content certainly means to us in this context. And content is also derived. So whenever we see content online, we see information coming from typically a number of different sources. So you're pulling content and aggregating content from back office systems, external sites, or other areas within your Sitecore content tree rather than the page you're viewing. If you search for web content online, you're going to get two very clear distinctions. 90% of the results will be homepage, news page, about us, FAQs, contact us, web content. But that's not where we're existing. We're existing at media assets, metadata, and multimedia. And that's really where we sit. We're looking at page assets rather than a page as a kind of piece of content. So pages don't drive Sitecore. Pages don't drive DMS. And objects are really what it's all structured around. Objects drive DMS. Without those objects defined, you're never going to be able to make DMS work. So one of our UX guys was out at a seminar. He was talking to a number of people around a kind of round table discussion. And they were all content editors or content owners. And he was just talking to them about what was really important to them and what made their lives difficult within a business. So clients not really knowing what their content should be is a big issue. No one being responsible for content until the site's gone live is an even worse issue. That content plan not being very well structured, not being thought out, not having a proper strategy before a site goes live, and getting into UAT and having that horrible scramble to sort things out. Lorem ipsum, terrible. Belief that content can be retrofitted at a later date, and not having representative content to give to the partner or agency you're working with up front. So one of the interesting things, though, this is slightly separate, is the content editors weren't sure how they could use content in an agile manner. And that's just an aside. So the initial principle is defining content structure, entities, attributes, and relationship frameworks. And it sounds a bit dev-centric, but it's not really. We're looking at representative content. we're looking to match content that's going to be entered into the system and then prototype where possible around that content. So you will have an idea of what your page is going to look like. Key things within this is really representative content. The content audit and the content inventory provides governance to your website. So page IDs, names, URLs, business goals, objectives, communication goals, the audience it's for, the persona it's for, categorization, language, documentation, file types, metadata. These are things that we capture for every single object within a site, within a content inventory up front, so we have a very clear idea of what the purpose of that site is. What is the object of a page? What is it there to do? What is the object of an object? So the principles to aid with the creation and understanding of IA. Paradox of choice. So people make choices. They've got a limited capability to make those choices, and it's trying to narrow those choices for them all the time so you get the outcome that you need. Limiting the options, it's not meant to overwhelm you, not meant to give people an unlimited amount of content. Focused navigation is very important. Navigation should be simple. It should have a singular purpose. Navigation should be grouped in a very simple and straightforward manner. So the objects are there to really define this entity and attribute and relationship. So every single object in your site will have a relationship to other objects. They sit within their own ecosystem. They will evolve as your site goes forward. From the day that you publish your site, each and every piece of content will change. It will begin to evolve and move forward. So we'll look at a brief example, and this is taken from the OPP project. These are user stories, acceptance criteria, and some tasks based on function. So at this stage, we're still in initiation, we're still in scoping. We've got some high-level requirements. They've been defined. We've worked through those. You're still very much in discovery mode. So you're then looking at some representative content from the business, a case study in this case. And within that, we're going to look at a quote as an object. So moving through, we're looking at breaking that down then into the various fields types that fit within that object. And then moving forward into Sitecore. So we typically don't use Azure for any wireframing or any prototyping. We go straight into Sitecore and prototype everything there. So what we're actually doing is we're beginning development very early on in the process and trying to get content into the UI, into Sitecore, so we can give it back to the editor. Then we've got structure, layout, presentation. How does the content, how does the widget, how does the UI pattern of that object interact with other areas on the page? Which placeholder is it? Which part of the layout is it? Which insert option is it? And then design. Design arrives, and there's bound to be change when design arrives. After all, we're in a fairly agile process here. And the end result from that design is we have our object. It's not necessarily going to use all of the attributes and all of the relationships that it has defined within it from day one, but it's there. It's ring-fenced. It's a clear piece of work. So moving on, correct field types within Sitecore to build the editor's UI. And this is maybe a bit too close to development land. This is from the CTO, John West. This is from his blog, which incidentally is on WordPress and not Sitecore. So when defining requirements, focus on information architecture. So the rest of it is maybe more dev-related, but that first point, focus on IA, look at IA. When you're engaging with partners, make sure they're looking at that. Don't let them start considering templates and technology first. Focus on the IA. So ensure user ambitions and business goals can be met and tracked. If the content doesn't meet business objectives, take it out, remove it. It shouldn't be in the site. If it doesn't meet a business goal, take it out. It has to support relationships. It needs to speak to the site visitors, and it needs to speak to them in a language they understand. It can't discriminate, and it can't focus on one group. And it needs purpose. So every single piece of content will also have a life cycle, and you need to be aware of that. So content should have a clear focus. You need focus on the content before you can start to build your profiles out within DMS. And without this, you can't begin to lead score. You can't begin to build up your sales funnel in DMS either. So content should be, it's got to meet business objectives. It needs to provide a return on investment of some sort. It needs to support those relationships. It has to have focus. So giving content focus, the content has to have a business goal. We've established that. And what are they? More than likely, increasing revenue, decreasing costs. What does this content do for the business? So what is the operational purpose of the piece of content? Is it establishing credibility, increasing reach, attracting new customers? And then the communication goal, is it advocacy? Is it awareness of a product, awareness of the organization? So getting down to this level is essential. And then defining KPIs. The KPIs will allow you to measure the effectiveness. No one piece of content is going to stay the same. It's going to evolve, so they need to be set early on as well. So designing for CEP or in this case DMS. So the content's purpose needs to be very clearly understood, and this goes throughout the site. The focus content will be easier to profile score if the content is very clearly focused against a type of user or a business need. Assigning a profile score to that and then matching it back against the pattern card or pushing it through into the sales funnel scoring is really much easier once you've done that. Focusing on the purpose, it just needs to be aligned. And then object structure is essential to the personalization. It needs to be very clear so you can go in through the page editor and start considering how that's going to work from a personalization perspective. And a good test for your site is if the page editor doesn't work, it's very unlikely that DMS will work on your site. If the page editor doesn't work, the objects haven't been created in a very clear fashion. So that's a good baseline. It's not really, the technical mastery of DMS isn't necessarily the hard bit, as so long as you're kind of following these basic principles when you're building. I think for us as a partner, the hard bit is the customer engagement. Being able to engage with the right stakeholders at the right point of this process, and for them to give you the time that you need to get the data out. I suppose Chris is probably going to talk about this later on as part of the SBOSS presentation. SBOSS are looking at a kind of 20-day engagement as a DMS kind of scoping phase. We're condensing a lot of that in the way that we work as part of the basic CMS build. But really, it's that engagement with the key people at the right time is the hardest part to get a customer to understand value in. So unless you've been through this, it's very unlikely that you're probably going to be able to move forward into the next stages of DMS consultancy. So assigning those values, going through lead scoring, defining the pattern cards and making them work effectively for you. So key aims of content first. This is a straightforward and simple one. Content should be separated from function. It should be independent of technology, so none of your content should ever be written in code. It should be separated from behavior, so that interaction should be separated from the object. It should be multi-channel. It should be agnostic completely of the device that it's delivered on. And where possible, it should be rich text, so it should be separated from formatting and any aesthetics so it can be reusable. So pulling the principles together, IA in the context of Sitecore is a process that leads to these object definitions and template definitions that enable content to be delivered in the correct manner. Ensuring user ambitions and business goals can be met is critical to delivering DMS successfully. So Sitecore Customer Engagement Platform, unless your content is structured correctly, DMS is unlikely to work for you. And content needs to be removed from layouts, so the Bs that we just looked at. So in summary on our approach, the way to get content or data, the way it's stored, its structure, its relationships, and its governance should support that piece of content and allow it to be purposeful, no matter how or where it's surfaced and who's viewing it or why. So back to OPP is a typical engagement. Was it a typical engagement for us, and is it kind of a typical project? So they really approached it creative first and not content first, which for us is pretty typical. They'd chosen a product based on capability, and they'd done a number of good things and made a lot of really good positive steps within their pre-work prior to the project. But they took creative first and not content first, which resulted in a lot of retrofitting of designs and particularly wireframes. So the wireframes hadn't been built with any consideration of Sitecore or DMS. They'd almost been built with a view of a page-based system by the agency that created them. So it wasn't something that had been refined against business goals. There was an understanding of what they were looking to achieve. There was an understanding that the website had to improve. It certainly had to increase brand value, and it looked great, but it didn't necessarily address underlying things that they were unaware of at the time when they were going through that strategy. So only once we started to rework the wireframes were we in a position to start with the object definition and the IA. And the content strategy had been kind of considered at that point, but again, it was viewed in an almost page-based manner. So rework was required. The way that we went around building objects first is a bit esoteric and a little bit abstract for an organization that's historically used something that's page-based. When we got into the content migration phase and we were asking people to blind fill boxes within a UI that have no relationship to a page at all, there was an initial bit of resistance and then a fair amount of trust put in us until a point where they had a eureka moment where all of a sudden a page turned up with all of the objects they've been creating. So there were challenges, none of which were insurmountable, and it required OPP really putting their faith in us and trusting our understanding and knowledge of the product to get through to a position where their concepts and visions were a bit more tallied to ours, and they dovetailed, and we could deliver something that really worked for them. So the project outcomes for OPP. The builds put them in a really good place from an IA perspective, and it's provided a greatly improved initial user experience. The site's got a revised look and feel, so that's a big tick in the box for the board there who hated the previous site. It's vastly improved the ability of the marketing team to actually deliver content and do a job. They are functioning as a digital team now, where previously they were completely inhibited. And they remain on brand, and they're actually empowered as a team, although their Sitecore learning continues. It provides solid foundations for integration and the evolution of content, and it's really provoked thought internally as to what they should be doing and where they can go and where DMS ties against their business goals and business strategy. So DMS-wise, OPP are using DMS, but as of yet, they've not started using a lot of the areas that I've not covered today. So they haven't scored their content. Scoring of the content is a challenging area. We've done it internally recently for a site rebuild for ourselves. It's not been a quick process, and it's not been without internal challenges or pain amongst the senior team. That workshop is planned with them, but again, it's that senior level stakeholder engagement you need. You need commercial understanding of what the business goals are. You need to have, in effect, the chief commercial people involved in defining what engagement values really work for the business. They aren't using engagement plans, but that's not surprising. I don't think anyone really is. We use them, kind of, but certainly not in true anger. And they're not really attempting to join on and off, online and offline together. And I think this is really where DMS is at its most challenging point, tying that integration from the user engagement and the user journey back into real CRM data, so you can start to get some proper BI back on what your customers and prospects are doing. But they are delivering personalized content, and they are delivering it to different persona groups. So this is the first phase for OPP, but it's still very much a project in working practice. So they've got dynamic targeted content. They deliver targeted content to a number of personas they're working with. They're delivering personalized content using DMS, so they are using the tool. And one big sea change for them is blog and social functions have got really good industry feedback, and that's around thought leadership and moving content that was written for these academic operation or psychological professionals, pulling it back away from the top level web content and putting it a little bit further down to create a different avenue into the site for them. So that's what the site looks like. Did phase 1 succeed for them? They've had immediate new business success from the site, and the project has paid for itself already. Certainly 6 or 7 months in, it had recovered its costs. It was delivered on time and to budget, so that was good for their senior team. And it really served to unite the internal staff and the beliefs that things can be delivered on time and against budget, as they had a track record of IT problems not delivering when they should, and certainly not against the scope that was put in place. So customer feedback's been good. Within their industry, they've had a good lot of praise. And SEO for them has improved significantly by defining content correctly, and just building a site in Sitecore, which helps in comparison to what they had previously. So DMS is functioning. Their digital journey is in a stage now where they're starting to move on, and they've got an awful lot on the roadmap, be that mobile ERP integration when the new ERP system is in place, which will be rebuild of the shop functionality. They're just about to go live with their multilingual sites. I think that was deployed out onto their staging environments earlier this week. So they're moving forward, and they're moving forward at pace, but for DMS to succeed, they really need to get into these value scoring. So what's next? We covered a range of areas today, or I've covered a range of areas today that really help with DMS, but I've missed a whole raft of things out. So engagement values, lead scoring, plans, linking on and offline, and knowing what's really important. 45 minutes just isn't enough for that. So we use DMS internally. We've done all of the above. We're planning to run a number of webinars over the coming months to cover this off in more detail. Dates, topics, and information be available from us should you wish to sit in on any of those. And you can always ask Sitecore because they'll have visibility of those as well. That leaves me with 2 minutes for any questions before coffee. Or just coffee. Yeah.
One of the hardest things in content strategy is that the hardest thing for an organisation
I think, so we've been through this with a number of organisations now, and it's hard for them to necessarily articulate their thoughts in a manner that's easily consumable initially. But we've got a number of tools that we can give them up front to help them kind of put down what they've got in place, conduct an initial audit, and then from there we work backwards from that point. Where are you now? What's the current kind of point in time? How do we move forward then and start adding in additional lines into, in effect, what's a great big spreadsheet, and focusing them more on what needs to be added in. So yeah, it's certainly challenging. It's the engagement with the customer that's always the most difficult part, getting them to buy into something that doesn't necessarily seem to add value from day one. Thank you very much.